Connecting community, creating impact. This is the Chamber Link.
Well, good morning and welcome back to the Chamber Link. I'm Catherine Grinberg, Executive Vice President at the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, and I'm excited to host today's episode. Today we're diving into a topic that's reshaping how companies think about success, and that is employee ownership. If you read our last Bridge magazine, you read a little bit about some of the companies that we're speaking with today, but I know I learned a lot in prepping for this session, so I'm really excited for you to hear from three of the individuals that we have in studio with us today. So I'm joined by Tammy Miller, Shane Waslaski, and Dan Martinson, who have embraced this model and are inspiring other companies to do the same. So before we dive into some of the questions that I've put together and all the expertise that you three bring, I want to start with some self-introductions just so that everyone can get to know you, the companies you either are with or have been with that are ESOPs, to get a little bit more of the history. So can we start down there with Tammy?
Yes, good morning. Great to be with you. Tammy Miller. Most recently, I was the Lieutenant Governor at the state of North Dakota. Had a great opportunity and really enjoyed serving the people of North Dakota. But most of my adult life was with Border States Electric. I spent 29 years with Border States and served 14 years as the CEO. Border States is 100% employee-owned through an ESOP, is the largest ESOP in the state of North Dakota based on assets, and has been around for more than 40 years. So excited to talk about a topic that I am super passionate about, employee ownership.
Awesome, thank you. And we're sitting with the beautiful Border States right behind us, so this is fitting to have you kick it off. Shane, let's move over to you.
Yeah, with Vistal, and Vistal is the ESOP that is the holding company for More Engineering and Communication Network Engineering, a couple of companies that have roots here in Fargo, but they also have presence all the way west to Colorado and east to Minnesota. I've been with the company on the board since 2018 and CEO since 2021. Company's been around for over 65 years between the two companies, great long history, an ESOP since 1998, and in 2004 became a 100% ESOP.
Awesome. Well, great for your leadership here today. And Dan, let's move over to you.
All right. Dan Martinson. I'm with Fargo Glass Paint Co. Fargo Glass has been around since 1917 as a family-owned, and it took a while as our family members started to move out of the active part of the business to come up with a plan. But it took about 10 years to get it done, but we got it done and relatively new compared to the others on the mics today. 2019, we became 100%. We would dove right in 100% right away. We thought it was the right thing to do for us, but so.
Great. We're excited to hear all about your experience and what you guys have experienced recently, kind of joining as an ESOP. So to kick us off, I did some research looking into ESOP, starting with, what's the acronym stand for? No, I'm joking. But really, I did some research into it. But Tammy, I would love if you'd help our listeners by talking a little bit. I know this is a big passion area for you. It was more than just where your career was at with Border States, but it's continued to be a passion for you. Can you talk a little bit about what an ESOP is?
Oh, happy to. An ESOP is an employee stock ownership plan, and an ESOP is a legal trust that holds shares for the employees. So very simply, companies will contribute cash to the ESOP. That cash buys company stock, and the shares of stock are allocated to the employees, and the employees build wealth in two ways: from the contribution and the stock value growth. So I mentioned Border States has been an ESOP for more than 40 years. So over those 40 plus years, their average contribution was 13%. So if you made $10,000, $1,300 went into the ESOP every year on your behalf, and that is company money. It's not pay to play like in a 401k plan. That money then buys company stock, and the account grew not only by that $1,300, but by that increase in stock value. And over the last 40 years, Border States stock, on average, has grown 17%.
That's impressive.
So employee owners have the ability to amass a significant amount of wealth just by showing up for work and doing a good job. There is a lot of governance and regulation around an ESOP. ESOPs are regulated by the IRS and by ERISA. ESOPs and their companies have audits, and they have independent valuations as well to determine the stock value for the company since they're not publicly traded. I think it's a great model, and I wish more companies in North Dakota would think about the ESOP model as they're looking at succession transition.
That's awesome and impressive growth that Border States has had. Just to clarify, so when you're saying this, it's any employee that works at an ESOP. This isn't just the leadership or just, a certain subset of people. This is everyone that works there, no matter your role.
Yes, and I like to say we have created hundreds of millionaires at Border States. Individuals who are driving truck, working at the counter, or maybe working in the accounting department here in the corporate office. It's for every working employee. And it is, we say it is like a 401k, like a retirement plan, but really, if you leave the company at any time, your vested portion goes with you. And that is, your shares are converted to cash, and you leave the company with cash.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like that would be a pretty good attraction effort for getting workforce in the market, is knowing that you're an ESOP and being able to bring people in. Shane, what have you guys seen for attraction and retention of your employees being an ESOP?
Yeah, one of the benefits of ESOPs is, as Tammy described, everybody's engaged in the business. And so there's this tremendous alignment that comes along with being an employee owner, because you aren't just an employee owner, you're acting like an employee owner, you're thinking like an employee owner. And so you gain great benefit from that. You get a lot of alignment, though, also from this idea that you're building extraordinary companies and you're helping grow extraordinary people. You're really helping them come along in their careers. We're all developing, we're all growing, but we're invested in one another and making sure that that really comes about. From a succession perspective, the ESOP has to take a tremendously long-term view of things. You want to be thinking long-term. You're not making short-term decisions. You're thinking what's best for the business in the long term for this company and for the employee owners. And it also includes the way we think about our next leaders, people managers, and individuals who are going to make strategic decisions for the company. We don't wait until somebody says, hey, I'm going to retire. We're thinking years ahead of time to try to determine how do you best prepare that individual to continue that legacy of growth and succession in the organization, and to take on that mantle of responsibility of growing other people. And so I think that that's part of the growth aspect of it. And then the final thing I would say on that topic is it's not just that they have a stake in the company's future, but it is this idea that it's an opportunity for all individuals to participate, just like Tammy mentioned. And so you're thinking about your peer, you're thinking about your colleague, you're looking at, across the hallway at the other individual, knowing that I'm making decisions, they're making decisions that benefit us all together. And so I think it's just a tremendous alignment that comes out of all of that mindset.
Yeah, and I think of you guys as workforce over at Moore Engineering and Vistal, and some of the tenure, I know we were just talking about before this, some that have been there since the beginning of when the ESOP started in 98, but 10 years of 30 and 40-year employees that want to stick around. And I think that's a testament both to the ESOP, but also the culture and the expertise that you guys have in the region. So we're lucky for that.
Yeah, we are. We take both pride in it, but we take a lot of responsibility on that front as well, which is we have very low single-digit turnover. We focus on long tenure. We count on those individuals to be the DNA of the organization that carries it forward. And then I would say a big piece of that tenure is when you have someone who's been with you 15, 20, 30 years, they become invested in the ESOP, not just as a financial tool, but it is the thing that we've created together. And so there's this sort of co-creation process that goes on, and I know our employee owners take a lot of pride in that.
And if I could add to that, Catherine,
Yeah.
There are two elements I think that are key to that responsible behavior, and that is clear communication, so that employees know what the strategy is for the company, and they have a scorecard. They see financial information. They see performance metrics. So they are educated and empowered to make an impact, and then also held accountable.
Mm-hmm. It takes the think like a CEO to the next level of think like an owner.
Yeah.
You really are one. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to transition to talk to Dan, someone that's been there kind of through that transition recently, becoming an ESOP. So stick with us. All right, we are back with the Chamber Link. Catherine Grinberg here, Executive Vice President at the Chamber, having a great conversation about ESOPs with Tammy, Shane, and Dan. So we're continuing the conversation and heard a little bit about the ESOPs kind of on my left side here with Tammy and Shane, but want to transition over to Dan because yours is unique that you've been at Fargo Glass and Paint for 37 years, and it was just transitioned to ESOP in 2019.
Correct.
So you were there through all of it. Tell us what that was like. What was the process to get there? What was the reasoning for that transition?
Well, I think the biggest reason was we've been a family-owned company, for 100 and some years, and those family members that were part of the company were transitioning out. And Fargo Glass, as I grew up in the company, was always run kind of for the employees. It was a give back kind of thing, but it wasn't a formal kind of thing. And I met with a couple of the family owners that were getting to that point, and I said, gave them their options. I said, I think ESOP is going to be a great option for us, and needed them to buy in. And when I said it's the ultimate give back to the employees, they were on board right away. And so from that standpoint, we had their trust and just going through the process. I remember, and I don't know if she does or not, but in the infancy of this and learning about ESOPs, I had breakfast with Tammy, and just to get more background, and she was gracious enough to do that and I learned a lot, and I'm still learning. We're 6 years into it, and some of the things every day I'm going, well, I don't know. If somebody will ask me, I don't know. So we have a great team that we've put together to go through this transition. But Fargo Glass in itself was really, the point of it was we're going to give back to the employees. And now they're starting to, 6 years, it takes a little while for them to figure out what it really means. Out of the chute, they're sick of me saying, well, I don't know, you're an owner, what do you want to do? So just getting them to have that mindset. But it took about 10 years for us to get everything aligned. It just took a while to get to that point. And we've had a few, since, I tell people this, it's the right thing to do for us. It's been, for us, we're kind of a regional glass construction and a specialty wholesale business. And for us, we're a wholesaler of as I'll call brand X window that we had for 30-some years. And January 1st of 2019, we became 100% ESOP. Fun, yay. And I got a phone call January 4th from that window supplier saying, oh, by the way, we're going to take that away from you, and we're going direct with everything. And that was half our business. And if you can imagine how little sleep I had in the next few days trying to figure this out, it was a lot. I didn't get a lot. And knowing, okay, we just dove into this. We can't go back, but we just lost half our business. What are we going to do? So, and we have. We've come back. I think we've come back stronger than we were before. We've picked up products just with the mindset, as Shane and all you've said before. We're going to build this thing. We're going to build it the way we want it, and it's going to be bigger and better as we go along. And that's the mindset that our employees have, our employee owners have. And but it was a significant thing to have to go through when you're talking about having to take on debt to start, and then losing half your business, and what are we going to do to pay this debt? And but it's come back. We've gotten stronger, and brought on another window. I'll say wouldn't have even thought it 10 years ago, but we are now a Marvin distributor, and it's a great partnership, family-owned company. We're in that mindset, and it's been not even a year, and it's been fantastic. So for us, it's been a road. It's been a journey. In 6 years, it's been a journey, and but we're already almost back to where we were pre-ESOP. So, yeah.
It sounds like it's a long-term play, right? And having to have that buy-in early, but it's said 10 years in the making. So
10 years to get there, And as Tammy said, I hope we just had our reveal this summer, and we're a little over 17% in the 6 years. I'd love to say we could do that over 40 years. I don't know that I'm going to be alive in 40 years, but that'd be fantastic for the employees and employee owners of this company.
Sure.
So that's what we're doing it for.
Well, thanks for sharing your story. That's great that Tammy got breakfast with you. Maybe you can get breakfast with the next
Yeah,
person listening
maybe.
to talk to them about your experience.
I would be willing to do that.
When you talked about that it was the right decisions for that company, right? Seems like it needs to be the right decision for a company to go down that route. What would any of you guys say kind of a well-positioned company or a company that makes sense to become an ESOP? What are kind of the attributes or what do you need to think about?
I'm happy to start with that. I think if a company is looking for a succession plan for the owners and they have strong leadership, a solid business that's growing, they are a great candidate for ESOP. I know ESOP has been a motivator for a number of companies to sell to border states because they were family owned, did a great job taking care of their employees, and they saw ESOP as kind of the same thing. And I know one acquisition that I did at border states, the sellers were going to start their own ESOP, and I met with them many times, and they finally concluded that it would take them 20 years to get to where border states was, so they sold to border states and accomplished the same thing, only quicker.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I would add to that in terms of the stability of the business. I think you definitely want to be in a stable place when you begin. You can ride out some challenges in the business, so it's not a model that's unforgiving when it comes to that. Similar experiences to Tammy when we talk to companies as we've diversified and we've added companies to our business. They say the same thing. They are thinking about their employees. They're thinking about a little bit about the legacy that they leave, and this idea that they're going to be able to grant to all of their employees the opportunity to become part of it if they hadn't done that already in some form is very much an attractant. And so we definitely have had the opportunity to have those conversations, and it is a great attractor of companies that want to be a part of that. I would say the other part of it is, as you're founding the ESOP, those complexities can be a distraction. So if the business is taxing the leaders at the time, you might just want to look for the right moment to do that. One of the ways to do that is to have great advisors, though, who can help you make that decision, figure out the timing. But it is another part of the business you have to think about. You have to take very good care of the ESOP. The ESOP is often, it's quite frankly almost always the first thing in your mind. But even when you're thinking through business challenges, you're thinking about how do I do this in a way that preserves that long-term legacy for all of our employee owners, maintains stability, grows the ESOP.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would agree that team, as I mentioned earlier, that you put together to get you through it, because it is very complex, and finding those right people, to help you transition and answer those questions is key. And going forward, they're your answer people.
Yeah.
We're fairly new at this, and we had a great team, and we wouldn't have been anywhere near where we are now without them.
Yeah, the people definitely make it, and I think that the title of our last Bridge magazine was "The Power of Employees," and that's kind of what I'm hearing from all of you. Is the team is so important and critical to move it forward. We have a couple minutes before our next break, but when we do come back from that, I want to talk more about these barriers and challenges. But before that, I want to hear kind of what is the first step that you would recommend if someone is interested and this has piqued their interest, kind of as you talked about, Tammy, maybe a succession plan. If they're listening today and they're like, oh, that could be interesting, I wonder if my company could fit for that, what is the first steps that you would recommend?
Dan, since you've been through this most recently, do you want to respond first?
Sure. I think, not that we did everything perfect, because we didn't, but I believe, as I said earlier, finding somebody who's been through it is, and most ESOPs, if somebody's looking to go through it, are more than willing to talk to you about it. And I think that's the first step. The next step would be, finding because there's lots of really good companies out there that deal with ESOPs. There's some in town here that have been great for us. That's what they do, so that's building that team, getting those answers. And then once you have the answers, being able to really look inside and say, is this the right thing for us going forward? That would be my suggestion. So the more you can ask of people to build that knowledge base, the better off you're going to be.
That's great. That's very good advice, and always, using that network. And it sounds like a lot of people are interested in sitting down and helping explain things. We're going to head to a break now, but when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of those challenges and barriers and how to overcome them. Welcome back to the Chamber Link. I'm Catherine Grinberg with the Chamber of Commerce here, having a great conversation about ESOPs with Dan, Tammy, and Shane. Thanks for joining us. We were just talking a little bit about Fargo Glass and Paint and how that transition transpired to become an ESOP. And in that conversation, we were talking a little bit about some of the barriers. So I wanted to touch on that now that we've come back to the show. Can we talk a little bit about the barriers to adoption and why more companies don't go down this route? Tammy, I know in our recent Bridge magazine, there was a wonderful article that talked a little bit about border states, but also you and your passion for ESOPs. Can you talk a little bit about some of the awareness and complexity barriers that people face that you talked about in that article?
Well, first off, I think most businesses and communities and employees have no idea or have never even heard of ESOPs. We had a luncheon in Bismarck a couple weeks ago, and we asked a lot of service providers who are serving ESOPs, did you have any education about ESOPs at college? And nobody did. So there is just a great opportunity to promote ESOPs, to educate and create more awareness. And we started that in October. We were very pleased. We received a proclamation from Governor Armstrong proclaiming October as Employee Ownership Month. So we had a celebration at the Memorial Hall at the Capitol and shared some information. We heard from 2 sellers who sold their businesses to the employees. We heard from an employee who's currently working at an ESOP company. And we heard from a 52-year-old employee owner who just retired after having a long career at an employee-owned company. So that was a great opportunity to share the story. And then we had a private session with a number of individuals to talk about how we can expand employee ownership in North Dakota. And the Equity Project tells us there are just under 8,000 businesses in the state of North Dakota that are owned by baby boomers who will need a succession plan. And we really think that if we can create more awareness and more education about employee ownership, many of those businesses will at least be able to evaluate and then decide if ESOP works for them. And if it does, it will allow us to keep those businesses locally owned and American owned. So really highly motivated to help with the education and the awareness for ESOPs in the state of North Dakota.
Yeah, that's great. And the awareness piece that you mentioned of people not even knowing. I know, Dan, you mentioned that you kind of were looking at a lot of different options at the beginning. You said an ESOP might be the best option. Can you remember back to when you kind of were thinking about ESOP and where you first heard about it or how you knew about it? What was that? What put it in your brain?
Well, I think, probably something, I consider myself kind of a recovering accountant. I'm an accountant by trade, and I've been out of it for 20-some years, but you're never really out of it. And things would come across my desk where all of a sudden here it is, and you're like, okay, what is that? What is that? And you start looking into them, and okay, here's a seminar. Yeah, maybe I want to go see that. I want to go learn something about that. And so you just kind of get into it. In our case, what were those options? And ESOP was a great option. Whether there was somebody else within the company, a group or individuals that could buy it, but it just gave so many benefits, not only for the whole of the company, but for those individuals those family individuals for us that were going to be going out, because there was some real benefits for them to sell to an ESOP as well. And so it just, when it came down, you stack up all the benefits for it. It just made the most sense for everybody. So
sure. And Shane, I know that you weren't there when More Engineering, More Holding changed to an ESOP, but maybe somebody pretty special this week that we're celebrating was there at the beginning. Do you want to talk about kind of the leadership at that time and transitioning?
Yeah, Jeffrey Volk, who's going to be honored tomorrow as a legacy leader by the Chamber, which is a great honor. And he was part of that transition and helped make that decision along some of the other partners at the time. And, on the topic of complexity that both Tammy and Dan have talked about is there are some startup costs. There's definitely some complexity to it, but business is complex, and so it's just another element that you have to think through. We've talked about the need for the advisors and having good individuals on your team who are capable of doing that. But the thing I would counterbalance that with, that while there's some challenges, ESOPs tend to outperform on most of the key metrics that are out there. And I grabbed a couple of those metrics, the most up-to-date ones. So there's about 15 million ESOP employees nationwide. About 6,300 companies have an ESOP in the country. So I wouldn't say they're rare, but there's a lot of businesses, and about 6,300 of them are ESOPs. Sales growth and annual employment growth tend to be about 2.3 to 2.5% higher. And then the average retirement balance versus the comparable worker who is not in an ESOP is about $130,000 versus a non-ESOP of about $64,000. So it's a substantial difference in terms of the individual benefit. And it isn't just about wealth generation. You're talking about generational wealth that people get to share with their grandkids and their children and their great-grandkids. And it's the business making the deliberate decision to say, we're going to share this with all of our employees. This is how we're going to bring all of that together. And during COVID several years ago, job losses were around 20%. ESOPs experienced less than 4% job losses. I think it was 4 to 5% in terms of job losses. And so there's a fidelity we have to taking care of our employee owners the best we can, and that's one of the ways that we do it, is create that longevity, and we want them to stay a part of the family.
That's great. I'm glad that you brought those statistics. That's certainly interesting, and just a nod to the leadership at that time to make that decision and kind of get through the difficult of it in order to have that long-term outlook and long-term success for the employees that are now benefiting from it.
Well, and if you listen to them tell the story, they will be the first to tell you, we were concerned, we weren't so sure, was this going to be the best thing? And you can model something out, but how something actually turns out isn't always the case. And of course, they were right to make the decision they did. They made a very wise decision for the company, for the employee owners.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think we haven't mentioned the impact to the community.
Yeah.
We know it's good for business performance. We know it's good for the employee with wealth creation and retention, more resilient companies, but it's also good for communities. These businesses stay local, and ESOP companies on average give 1.5 to 2 times more per employee to nonprofits in their communities, and employees at employee-owned companies on average volunteer 3 times more volunteer hours than employees in non-ESOP companies. So it is really good for the community as well. Employees understand their responsibility to give back.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a little more, Tammy, when you brought up in the last part there about companies being locally rooted and why that's happens through ESOPs. Do you want to expand any more on that of why that happens?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have been in a number of communities when I was with Border States leading M&A, and we would buy companies, and the local EDC or chamber folks would feel bad because the company was being sold to a company headquartered in North Dakota. And I would say, this company is more locally owned than ever before, because every single employee that works for this business in this community is an owner, and all of that wealth is going to stay in the community. So I think it's great for the employees and for those communities, and those businesses, those employees stay local and American owned.
Yeah, that's so great to hear, and really putting the money back in the pockets of these employees that are working so hard and then turns back into our community. So we love to hear that.
Well, I mean, it's a great model, because why not give employees wealth that they helped to create as employee owners?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there you go, Dan. And in 20 years, I'll make sure and have your team back on so that they can talk about the visionary leadership that you and your colleagues had to be able to move towards this.
Yeah. I don't know if it's visionary, but it was certainly for us. As I said, I grew up in this company, and it was always a give back, and it may have been through profit sharing or traditional pension plans or something like that, but to have that ownership, those family owners saying, yeah, this is the right thing to do. It's the ultimate give back to why not give the company to the employees? And I just wanted to set up the company. We're 100 years old, and why not set it up for the next 100 years? And I think it's always been the right thing to do, and it's been great for us. I'm looking forward to, what the next 10 years are going to be. There's some significant things you have to do in this first few years, and Fargo Glass has always been a company, long as we've been around, we didn't have any debt. We didn't have anything. We had to take on debt to do this, which is hard to handle. It's hard because then all of a sudden you have to kind of throttle back some things to get yourself back. And so I've been kind of chomping at the bit a bit about, what can we do? How can we grow? How can we do things? So I've been, asking those advisors, okay, how long do I have to wait? How long? Well, usually 4 or 5 years, and then you start, and I'm like, oh, okay. Well, now we're in that mode, and we're having those discussions with my internal team of, okay, where can we go? Strategic planning about how can we get bigger? How can we do these things? And it's exciting. It's exciting for me, but it's really more exciting for me because I'm seeing the other people within the team, the people who are going to be there a lot longer than I am. I'm not going to really get the full benefit of this. I got probably about 4 years left, and I wish I was 40 years old again because it's going to be huge in another 10 years, and I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, and I'm sure they each have stake in that ownership, so they're excited about the strategic plan moving forward and how to help grow it too.
I hope so.
That's great. That's great. We're going to take one more break, and then we'll be back for 10 more minutes with our guests on the show today, and I want to talk about the future of ESOPs and what you guys think is coming in the community. All right. Thanks for sticking with us. We're back for our last segment about ESOPs here on the Chamber Link. Catherine Grinberg here with the Chamber, and pleased to have Dan, Tammy, and Shane with me in studio to talk a little bit about ESOPs and their experience. Want to end, we've gone through a lot today. I think, we just said in the break we could do this all afternoon. Maybe petition to have a afternoon radio show about ESOPs. I don't know. Are you in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, right. You have a lot to share, so that's great. But we've gone through the barriers. We've gone through you guys' perspectives and how we got here, and talked a little bit about the importance of it for employees, for the community, kind of the wide gamut that we've covered. But I want to talk a little bit about the future and where you guys think ESOPs are headed as far as, Shane, you brought up a great statistic, 6,300 nationwide. That number honestly surprised me a little bit. I thought it would be higher, maybe just because I know of, several of the ESOPs in the region here. So I assumed that was the case everywhere, and that there's a lot more companies that I don't know of that are ESOPs. But I'm curious on what you guys think of, Tammy, you talked about getting the word out about it, the awareness piece and those sorts of things. Where do you guys see kind of the future of business as it stands with ESOPs?
So that was an interesting statistic about the number of ESOP companies in the U.S. That's 8% of the private workers, not the public sector, private sector workers work at an ESOP company. We have the same statistic in North Dakota, sadly. So lots of upside for employee ownership. So I mentioned the number of companies that have baby boomer owners. I think we have great opportunities there to look for an ESOP transition with some of them, but we need to make it easier. So I mentioned this luncheon we had a couple weeks ago. What we want to do is continue the momentum, continue to work with folks in North Dakota who are passionate about employee ownership, and evaluate opening a center for employee ownership in the state of North Dakota. So you asked Dan where they went when they were looking for information. If we had a center for employee ownership like they do in 24 other states, we could point individuals to that resource and they could get a lot of resources at that center. It would be probably staffed by one person, but it would be a hub to connect individuals with all of the consultants and other ESOP companies in the state. We're also talking with higher ed. We found that ESOP generally isn't part of the curriculums at the universities and colleges, so how can we embed a little bit of ESOP in the curriculums and also have employee owners come to the schools and tell students about the wonderful benefit that employee ownership is? And then also with our ESOP companies, can we create more internships for employees so they can experience firsthand what being an employee owner is just as an intern? So those are a few things that I would like to see happen over the next 12 months. Shane, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think in the heart of ESOPs is the spirit of optimism. There's this belief that we're going to continue to do good things. We're going to be a company that serves its communities. In North Dakota, Minnesota alone, our engineers serve over 150 communities. And I see on a routine basis, practically daily, the way they pour their hearts into holding up those communities, helping them with infrastructure projects, telecommunication projects, and making sure that the services and the needs that they have. And so I just think that spirit of optimism is built into it. And I serve on the board of 2 other ESOPs. That's how passionate I am about ESOPs. And I see the same spirit in other ESOPs. So it's not just mine. It's not just, I know DSG and Border States and listening to Dan talk more about Fargo Glass Paint. These are the spirit of the individuals. And there's this virtuous cycle of mutual benefit that I sometimes question, are people attracted to us because we're an ESOP, or are we attracted to them because we see in them this spirit of optimism and growth? And this virtuous cycle that just continues to create something good for the employee owner, something good for the individual who wants to grow in their career and do something great. So I just see all this optimism, all this potential, and I share the enthusiasm of both Dan and Tammy that there's a great future ahead for those that choose this business model.
Great. And Tammy, I appreciate your leadership in the state and moving some of this forward and working alongside others. Even though you're no longer at border states and you've served the state through lieutenant governor, and now you're really kind of driving this point home across the state. So thanks for your leadership in that, and we really appreciate someone stepping up and sharing the good word on it as well. Dan, I'm curious, what do you hope that your employees and their families will maybe say about the impact of employee ownership in 10 or 20 or 30 years from now?
Wow, that's a big one.
Did I stump you on that one?
Well, I don't
right
know
at the end of the show.
Me, but yeah, I think more than anything that as you know, you heard the stories of some of these mature ESOPs, and we have customers who are also ESOPs and had the same stories where somebody who maybe even thought, well, I'm going to retire someday, but I don't know, I'll have to have Social Security. I better really pinch my pennies, and they get in these situations and they're going, wow, I can retire, and I can retire well. I can do the things I want to do. And I think that's what I would want for my employees, to be able to really look at this as, you forget sometimes that it is an employee benefit. There's so many more things to it than that. But in the end, that's what you're doing it for. You're trying to set up your employees to be able to do the things they want to do after employment. And that's what drives me on it. And I just want to make sure that those employees are taken care of and their families are taken care of. And boy, if like I said, I might not be around for some of that, but if that happens, I guess hopefully I'll be able to see that and be satisfied that we did the right thing.
Mm-hmm. That's all about the legacy, right? Though, like leaving the impact for the next generation and that next workforce and the families to come that you may never meet, but that this ESOP will help.
You hope so.
Impact.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any other final words? We have just a couple minutes left before I wrap things up. Anybody have any final words on ESOPs or anything?
Well, if anyone out there listening would like more information, they certainly can go to any of the websites for the companies that are represented here, but you might also go to the ESOP Association website, to National Center for Employee Ownership, or for EOX Networking, which is Employee Ownership Expansion Network. So lots of good resources out there to learn a little bit more about ESOPs and employee ownership.
Thank you. That's great.
I would say that, on that line, those organizations are doing such a good job of getting the word out. And, this little, I'm so very little, I don't like politics at all, but it's essential, because I think both sides are seeing the benefits of this. And as it continues to grow, and the more people that employees that are getting in there isn't a downside in that from a political standpoint. Why don't they encourage this more for everybody? And because it's going to be better for everybody along the road. So.
Absolutely. Shane, last words?
Sure. So we, in addition to EOX that Tammy mentioned, there's a couple of other organizations. We interact nationally with peers, and so there's the ESOP Association, there's the ESOP S Corporation Association, also known as ESCA, and then there's NCEO, which is the National Center for Employee Ownership. All have great resources in addition to EOX, which is doing a phenomenal job. And to your question, I think EOX deserves great credit for what they're doing locally as well. But amongst all of those organizations, we like to interact with one another. We are proud of our teams and proud of the model. We work hard to make sure that this model is the right model for our team, and we're always happy to talk and share with others.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That's really a great way to help inspire others to have these conversations. So if anybody wants to check in with any of these leaders on the podcast radio show today, please do so. And it sounds like they're more than willing to kind of pass that knowledge on of what they've learned and what they've experienced. So thank you all for being on the show today. Thank you for what you're doing in our community and for your organizations and how in turn that impacts the community. I do want to make a plug in the last few seconds here for our Bridge magazine, The Power of Employees. You can learn a lot more about these companies as well as others and how they're investing in people and how that in turn impacts company and community. So I encourage you to take a look at that and read up more on these, as well as join us tomorrow as we honor Jeff Volk, our legacy leader for 2025 for the Chamber of Commerce. As we kind of talked about earlier in the show, he's got a great legacy, helping impact the generations that are to come through more engineering and all the work that he's done in our community. So encourage you to join us for that. And then join us next week on the Chamber Link for the next podcast, and we'll have new guests on. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.
Catherine.